Thank you, and thanks everybody for joining. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about what sensitive unstructured data is. It's intellectual property. It could be anything from customer information to customer surveys to internal processes and procedure manuals, or it could be new product plans or new product designs. It's also information that is subject to regulatory compliance, whether that's industry regulatory compliance, like in, for example, the financial services industry, where you have GLIBA and NYDFS, and most industries who take credit cards need to adhere to PCI DSS, and then there's privacy regulations such as GDPR and CCPA. So when you're thinking about unstructured data, I want you to think more about information that finds itself in files or documents in common applications like, for example, Microsoft Office. It's also PDF, or if you're in the manufacturing industry, you might have CAD, computer-assisted design. I don't want you to think about structured databases mainly because that information that is in a structured database can find its way out and make its way into the Microsoft Office applications. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that unstructured data in files or in document formats don't typically have, or they don't enjoy the same level of security that a structured database has. Now, the problem with unstructured data and how it starts and can get very easily out of control, the behavior of data in files and documents is, think about this, a single worker may create roughly 50 documents per day, and that could be derivatives of a single document or copies of a single document, but on the average, 50 documents per day or 50 megabytes a day for a single worker. Now, multiply that by, let's say, 3,000 people in your company are doing the same or similar work. Now, you take that 50 documents or 50 files, and you multiply that by 3,000, and you've now got 150,000 files, or 150 gigabytes of data. That's a lot, and it's a lot of data that is largely not protected. So think about all that data that is not protected. Most businesses are working in a combination of multi-cloud or hybrid cloud environments. They're dealing with advanced persistent threats, and they're also having to comply with changing regulatory requirements. That rapid growth in unstructured data is vulnerable to insider threats and can cost reputational damage. It could cost you your competitive advantage, or it could lead to regulatory fines for non-compliance. Most importantly, it's expanding your threat or your risk surface. So there's a lot of difficulty in balancing privacy and security. Security tends to come at risks through the use of technology and weighing the threats against what technology is to apply. And that typically means things like protection or access control. Where privacy is a little different. Privacy has been talked about as more of a discipline or a process rather than a technology issue, because it deals with identity of an individual and compliance to regulations. So there needs to be a balance here about how to use security technologies in a way that satisfies the issues related to privacy. So the path to gaining visibility and control of that sensitive unstructured data is through discovery and classification. So when thinking about what I talked about in the earlier slide and how unstructured data can easily get out of control, you really need to locate it. If you don't know what data exists, you couldn't possibly protect it. And once you do that, you locate, you classify and protect it, but you have to do that at the file level. When you do that, when you take all these steps to find your unstructured data, classify and protect it at the file level, then you'll be on your way to stronger security and stronger compliance to security regulations or privacy regulations. So now let's jump into the fireside chat with Tom. Thanks for being here, Tom. And of course, if you have any questions, then please go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I'll be happy to answer them. So let's talk to Tom now. So thanks so much, Tom, for joining. I really appreciate it. I know your time is valuable. So maybe you want to give a couple of second introduction, who you are and what you do
Sure.
for Commerzbank.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. Very happy to be talking today. I am the regional CISO for Commerzbank New York. I've got responsibility for InfoSec risk management, security awareness, physical security, business continuity, and a few other things as well. I've been involved in information security in one way or another for over 20 years. And, it's always something new and exciting to keep me up at night and keep me busy. But thankfully it's a Friday right now, so far so good.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue into my first question for you. So, as a CISO of a large bank, so what are your top concerns, with data security and security in general?
Yeah, I think, the one word I would talk about is loss, right? Loss of reputation, loss of people, loss of data, right? And that data part is really important because, the regulators are really zooming in and focusing in on that particular area. So from like a cybersecurity perspective, we have to provide services, right? We have to provide services to our clients, to our customers. We could lose that ability to provide services. That's bad, right? So resiliency is a big topic there. But then that loss of data is also equally important because a lot of regulators are, offering up penalties if you're not accurately and adequately protecting that sensitive customer data. So, I mentioned the loss of a service, but the loss of data could be just as bad for a bank or a financial service company. Loss of personnel as well. I mean, in this COVID reality, people are going to be sick. People are working from home. May not be as easy to do things. So that's that three areas of loss that worry me, this day.
Yeah, no, that's valid concerns, and obviously a lot of what we hear from our customers as well. So you brought up an interesting point about the working at home and how the COVID has affected affected the workplace in general. But do you see concerns over data loss from the work at home new normal, which is a term that I'm not really happy about, but
Yeah, I think, all of the concerns that were present pre-COVID, data exfiltration, data loss, it's just been amplified significantly because of the exposure, because you have, 90%, 95% of workforce at home now. What are people doing with the data? Are they storing it on their laptop? Are they sharing it with friends and family or competitors? And how do we know? And what can we do about it? Can we restrict it? What protections and controls can you put around the data into the data itself? So it's a mind shift going from worrying about someone walking out of an office with files, right? No one's in an office anymore, but we worry now about people sending out those attachments. Copying them to USB sticks, sending it out via email, screen sharing, all of those types of things. The more people work remotely, the more these risks get amplified. Again, they were there before, pre-COVID, but it's just the amplification of it that has me worried and puts data really at the focus of our risk profile.
yeah, no, that's perfect, because that's exactly what we've been talking about for months now, is that there haven't been, a lot of companies haven't been proactive in protecting the data, and now you're in a situation where you've got people from home and you're not sure what's exactly going on with that information. So what we've been talking about discovery and classification. So can you talk a little bit
Yep.
about what you've done in terms of classification and discovery, and how that's helped you sort of rein in your issue.
I think what's so important is for organizations, you have to start out with data classification, have a policy, right? Have your standards, get the structure in place. But it's not enough just to have those, ivory tower type policies. It's nice to have them, and you have to have them, but you have to do something concrete about it. When I think about what we've done in the bank here, we're using the Fasoo tool that allows us to do data discovery, for example, right? And that allows us to confirm and challenge what we already know. And I'll give an example. Prior to using Fasoo, we would go through and talk to data owners, a couple questions, right? Do you guys have, highly sensitive data in this directory? And it's a word of mouth, right? It's an interview. It's a good first step or a step zero, but you got to verify, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
no data owner is going to know where all of their interesting data is. I've yet to meet a person who's capable of that, to be honest. If it exists, let me know. So what we're doing is being able to run, data radar and getting those scans in place. That turns up interesting things, because maybe there was a project from 5 years ago that has somebody's SSN in a directory nobody cares about. But you know what? The attackers care about that. And we can confirm the map that they kind of gave a rough outline of, and we could confirm it or update it or challenge it, which is really important. And I think where companies are without doing proper data discovery, it's almost like if you ever saw maps from the 1500s, medieval maps, right? And you see one of Africa, Europe, or even the New World, like, you'd be shocked at how big Florida looks. And that's how it is with data classification nowadays, and that first discovery. Like, when you talk to a user, yeah, they've got sensitive data and it's important, right? But you're not precise. Yeah. And you need that precision, and that precision can only come about by doing good scans and getting that insight through automation that you can't get from word of mouth. So the industry, we got to move from that 1500s medieval map, right, to something in 2020, which is precise and data driven.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I remember we used to say at Gartner, you don't know what you don't know until you know. And then even at that, you still need to sort of, I don't want to say tweak, but, it at least gets you a foundation, that you can work with, and at least get on the path to, responding to incidents, or responding to, a data subject access request or something.
Because again, not all the data is equal, right? And there's going to be cases where, from an IT perspective, you might have thought that the data in a certain directory was actually really sensitive, and now you can kind of prove that it isn't. And then you could start to retire some of that data. You can start to get rid of it, offload it from the really expensive storage. There's no reason for it to be, 24/7 availability. So you get some cost benefits there. I'm talking more IT stuff here than security, but it helps. It helps reduce your data clutter and the proliferation of data. I know storage is cheap, but still, it could be a mess. And you shine that flashlight in there, and you see, you know what? Yeah, this data is not important. It's not necessary. Let's retire it. Let's put it offline.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So the other thing that I used to always say, when consulting clients, was that, why hold on to something that may get you in trouble? Yes. So, you've got all this data that is, out there expanding your risk surface, which is what I just talked about in my 5-minute intro. Yeah. And, why, like, eliminate that and, sort of contain, the really important stuff, and get rid of things that could potentially get you in trouble.
Exactly. And then that's where, being able to prioritize, and this is where it comes into, like, responding to incidents, right? So if we know now the type of data that's been impacted, if it's, low value, if it's public information, yeah, no one wants an incident, but it's less bad. It's less bad. And all these incidents you have to triage, limited resources, limited time, with COVID, remote workforce, and even from a incident response perspective, people are not all huddled together anymore. It's a little bit more challenging. So you only want to focus on those incidents that matter a lot. And only by then knowing that, okay, your top sensitive data was impacted, that could lead to the actions you need. It could lead to your playbooks being triggered. And it's just more efficient to kind of have that knowledge ahead of time that, yeah, if data was found in this directory and you have your radar and you know your mapping, oh, we really care about that now. And you know what? If it's not that important, we still care, but just not as much.
Yeah, no, you made a really good point. Something that I actually didn't really think of until just now is that, you know, when you're not all together in an office, you can't do the huddles. You can't, you know, have the, you know, fire alarm that says, you know, hey, we had an incident, you know, what do we do about it? Now you have to rely on phone calls or video conference calls or something like that because everybody's, you know, not together.
And exactly, I mean, in the tri-state area, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a tropical storm that came by, and power was lost by some people. They were out for a while, so it's like a 1-2 punch. Remote access might be down. So those are all things being thrown at us that make for a more challenging incident response. And at the end of the day, I mean, the regulators, you know, an incident's an incident. They're not going to give you a hall pass or something for, you know, COVID and hurricanes. You still have to protect the data.
Yeah, the term better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission doesn't really apply here.
No, and
unfortunately.
One thing that I've seen, maybe it was a month or two ago, there was a news story about a mortgage company that they're going to be the first company to get fined by the New York Department of Financial Services, the DFS, which in finance is like the regulator. Yeah. And it's all about, it was like a mortgage company. They had some PII exposed on their website. And it looks like they're going to be fined potentially $1,000 per record.
Ooh. That sounds expensive.
Like, so what's the cost of a breach? I mean, there were studies done historically by, I think, Ponemon and IBM saying maybe $150 or $200. Well, you know, the regulator is now saying maybe $1,000.
Right. Yeah.
It could have been prevented. So that gets the attention of management, of senior management. They don't want to be the next, you know, company to get fined. So that shows how important the data security topic is now, because now we could kind of quantify it, right? We know one record, $1,000. Okay, what's our exposure? We have all the data, let's calculate it, then let's protect it.
Right, yep. No, and you know, you want to be the poster child for what to do right, not be the poster child for having all the fines. And that makes totally sense. But given that then, so what has been the biggest challenge for you when complying with privacy and industry regulations, because you just brought up NYDFS?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenges we face are interesting because it's a wide range of regulators. There's going to be some common ground, but then there isn't. And a lot of times the regulation, it's not too prescriptive, so there's a gray area. And the gray area means there'll be interpretation. And that means year over year, depending on who the regulator sends on site, or virtually in this case, they might take a harsher interpretation, or they may take a lighter one. And from a risk perspective, that's chaos, right? Because, you know, one year it's light, the next year it's medium, or one year it's black, the next it's white. What is it? So you have to really maybe take that worst case scenario approach and be ready for anything. So interpretation of the rules is challenging. You know, different jurisdictions have different rules as well. So being part of a European organization, they take privacy on steroids, basically. In the US, I know California is out there. They're usually the first in the nation to do something about something, and privacy is no exception. But it's that juggling act of, you know, intense scrutiny on privacy from a European perspective to less intense for now from a US perspective. And then you run the risk also, you got to right size it. So there's always concern, well, we got to do something about GDPR. We got to do something about it. Well, if you don't have data about European individuals, then maybe you don't have to do as much. But how do you know? Well, that's where you got to discover that data, and that's foundational. It really is foundational, because if you realize you don't have passports about people from Croatia, maybe you're less likely, no offense to Croatia, but you're less likely to have to worry about these things.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to verify, you got to find out. And that's where that foundation of classification and discovery comes in, to kind of help you know which regs you have to worry about.
Yeah, it's almost like that's like the very first, that's obviously the very first step, because when you think about your point of having to be adaptable, or, ready to adapt to whatever changes that come about, if you have that discovery and classification put in place, you already know where your data is, right?
It,
'Cause I know where all my sensitive unstructured data is, said no one ever. And then, right? So you need to go in and make sure that you take that step. So this way you're actually ready. So given that, then we've got a few more minutes left, but so given that, over the last, given the changes, with the workforce, the COVID effect, the changes in regulations and what have you, and having to be able to adapt very easily, is there anything that you would do differently in the, in the last, like, maybe year and a half?
I think I would have taken data classification more seriously. I would have gone back 3 years or 2 years or whatever, and wanted to start earlier. I think that's because we're fortunate that we've been working on the project with Fasoo, and we've got things in place. But again, companies, if they weren't taking it seriously, they should have started that conversation years ago. Yeah. Because of these unforeseen issues with incident response, with regulations, with pandemics. There are so many benefits to having that clear data map that really reaps dividends. So it's never too late, of course, but sooner would have been better if I could turn back the clock. That would be something for sure that we would have wanted to really implement, and not just have the nice paper policies that look great on paper, but it's not really that valuable in the real world.
Yeah. Well, and I think also constantly, revisiting policy and, classification, we've always said should be kept relatively simple, 3 categories, maybe 4 maximum. But, that's, it's just something I think that should be live, right?
Yeah. It has to be live, and what it has to adapt to will be changes in regulation and privacy as they happen. So in theory, say next year, there may be, a nationwide, well, maybe in a couple years, a nationwide privacy law. Well, what's that law going to be? It's going to be first name plus last name plus an ID. Is it going to be first name, last name, ID plus address? Yeah. There's so many variations, but being able to adapt to that is really key. And then being able to search for the right patterns and terms in your unstructured data, depending on what the privacy laws ask for, is also key. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
There might be IP as well. So
that's true. It might be pictures. It could be anything, right?
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. So that flexibility and keeping on top of it is so important.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And also, I think internally, because you mentioned, talking to the people within the organization and maybe the, business unit leads about, so what information do you have? How do you use it? How do you share it? How is it created? What applications do you use? Because a lot of companies don't know, or they don't have a full spectrum of, what's out there.
Exactly. So, and I think what's important with that is when you have those conversations, especially in the unstructured side, being able to show them evidence that could open their eyes to what they actually have is very important. Because just from a governance side, these are the people who ultimately own the data. It's not me, it's not you, it's not IT, it's the business, and they need to be accountable for it. They need to have skin in the game. And it's so important, because without that, IT is going to guess, which is bad.
Yeah.
and you need that involvement, which will then percolate up to senior management. So you got to bring in the data owners, the directory owners, the business. They need that they're stakeholders. They're definitely stakeholders.
Yeah, I feel like you just answered my, my sort of last question for you, which was, what advice would you give to, the people listening right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that start to explore your options for data discovery, data classification. Again, step 0, get the policies done, get those wrapped up, get them checked with legal and compliance, right? But then seriously start exploring your options for tools, your options for technology, and don't make it an IT decision only.
Mm-hmm.
Involve your business stakeholders, similar to what I just said, but the business, again, they own the data. They need reminders of that. They got to be involved.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and also the aspect of protecting the data as well. So, once you've discovered it and classified it, you have to make sure that you have the right protections in place as well. So, and everybody needs to be part of that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I might have my own opinion of what should be protected and how, and it might be very draconian. It may not, may break the business for all I know, and I can't do that. So there's got to be that creation. There's got to be that insight and exchange with what is and isn't appropriate. Because at the end of the day, the business still has to operate.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, listen, I can't tell you how happy I am that you took the time to join me for this fireside chat.
My pleasure.
And I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, and thank you again. And again, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat box, and we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.